In a world where hypnosis podcasts come and go, one man is here to deliver a knockout, no-holds-barred approach and deliver electrifying interviews with the world's top experts so you can discover the secrets to their success. Introducing the Hawaii Hypnosis Podcast. Subscribe to the newsletter and get instant access to 4 free skill-building audios that utilize a revolutionary hypnotic approach to improve your skills from the inside out. It's practically bulletproof. As a member of Hawaii Hypnosis, you'll join the ranks of the movers and shakers in the hypnosis and NLP community and discover how to significantly improve your skills from the inside out.
Aloha, folks. This is Antonio Perez with the Hypnosis Product Reviews podcast. Today, my guest is somebody that I've been trying to interview for quite some time. The time zone difference has made it difficult. Today, my guest is Lloyd Glauberman from HPPCDs.com. Aloha, Lloyd. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
I just want to make sure. And you said your last name correctly, right?
Glauberman.
Glauberman. Okay. Has a little more German sound to it.
A little, yeah. It has German origins. Absolutely.
Now, if you don't mind me asking, how did you get into the healing professions? I believe you're a psychotherapist, right?
I'm a psychologist. I've been doing it privately for 30 years, and I got my degree at Syracuse University in psychology. And my interest in hypnosis, I guess, like most people, when you come out of a psychology program, there's a tendency to think you know a lot, but you actually don't know very much at all, so you go about taking different kinds of workshops to see whether you can find something that would be useful. So, hypnosis always had that magical quality. So I took some training in hypnosis, and then eventually, like most hypnotists, encountered the works of Milton Erickson. At the time that I became involved in that was the time that NLP made its first big splash back in the early 1980s. So I took some workshops individually with Bandler and Grinder, and Ericksonian hypnosis was part of the mix, and that's when I got involved in the more interesting aspects of hypnosis, because obviously Erickson's stuff was so different and so exotic in terms of the way he went about changing people that it made traditional hypnosis somewhat less interesting. And from there, I purchased a flotation tank, which interested me because of the state of consciousness that flotation was able to evoke. And it was from the use of the flotation tank and the idea of the Ericksonian approach and the dual induction approach to hypnotic procedures, where eventually it evolved into what are now known as the HPP programs, which tweaked your interest, obviously, or else I wouldn't be talking to you now.
Exactly. So anybody's listening, the HPP audios, if I remember correctly, hypno-peripheral processing.
Hypno-peripheral processing, that's correct. That, by the way, that was not the original name of the program. When I first started doing this, I was working with another psychologist, Philip Halbeth, and we originally had a concept that we called hypno-subliminal processing, where we combined the dual induction approach with subliminal perception by placing subliminal messages in between some of the phrases used in the stories that we were telling, not subliminal in the sense that below the surface of awareness, but just at a very, very low volume. But we didn't find that as effective as the use or the accidental influence of messages that were not necessarily meant to be messages, but suddenly appeared by virtue of the juxtaposition of words, which is where the whole concept of hypno-peripheral processing evolved, because it actually occurred accidentally. And by that I mean there were 2 stories being played simultaneously, but the crossover of the stories from one story to the next was an accidental occurrence. The message, feel better, where feel was in one story and better was in the other story, accidentally occurred. And I was listening to it while I was at that time it was a dry flotation tank, and I suddenly realized, well, this was the way to go about doing this. Crossing messages over from one story to the next, embedding the messages in such a way that they would cause the least amount of attention to themselves. if you know what I mean. Call the least amount of attention. So the whole idea was messages are most effective when people don't notice them. I mean, that's the whole point. Bypass the conscious mind, you stand a much better chance of influencing somebody. And so the whole idea was, well, how do you do that? And getting somebody's conscious mind out of the way is one way to do that, or helps to do that. And the dual induction did that because, number one, it was too much information to process. And then once you get the conscious mind out of the way, how do you present information as efficiently as you possibly can? Hence, the crossover message, which, like I said before, was not planned, accidentally occurred, and then, of course, it was like, how do you do this? How do you systematically cross messages over? Which, well, that became a technical issue, and that took some time to figure out how to do. But eventually, I got better at it, and hence started recording as much as I could when it first happened. Because, like most ideas, when something first happens, you kind of catch on fire, and you say, "Wow, this is really good. Let me keep doing this." And that's what I did for a period of about 15 years. I did a lot. Hence the stuff on the website. I assume you've listened to some of it, right, Antonio?
Yeah, I want to comment on anybody.
Absolutely.
If you're listening, if you're familiar with hypnosis, you're probably familiar with dual inductions, having audio in each ear. A lot of people will think they would be really off-putting, it'd be really jarring, and not in the slightest. So when you're listening to his stories, like how he's talking now, is way more faster than on an induction. And it's very soothing. And I've noticed when first time I listened to it, I think it was the procrastination one.
Okay.
Took me a while to actually get to listen to it, but I was listening to it and I remember thinking, I was like, what's going on? This is taking forever. And all of a sudden, right when you had it split, there's almost like an echo effect between both words, and it's almost like you could feel your brain kind of shift. And I'm like, oh, okay, I see what's going on. And then at one point, and then half an hour later, I open my eyes. That's when the time distortion happened. I open my eyes. I'm like, oh, wow, like a full half an hour just happened within like 2 minutes.
Your point about people's initial response to the idea of two simultaneous inputs, because everybody normally, I mean, how many times in your life do you ever hear two things at the same time, unless you're a stockbroker with multiple orders in your head? By the way, they're the only people who can follow everything. So
yeah.
It's less effective for a stockbroker, but most people naturally assume that if you hear two things simultaneously, it will be jarring and annoying, and how is that possibly going to be useful? And as you pointed out, it's not about that, it's about the way you do it. So if everything slows down and there's music in the background and the pace is such that you kind of float along on a river of words, then eventually, over time, you'll simply stop listening, and off you go. And it's that moment in time which is ideal to introduce information, because when you drift away, a couple of things happen. And the first is you release all your tension. As soon as you stop listening, that's the brain's way of telling the body, let everything go. Then your brain goes into what is typically known as the hypnagogic or the twilight state, which is the state in between waking and sleep. And that's been shown via research that it's the ideal state to receive incoming information. If the information is bypassing consciousness, but it registers, well, it's likely that you're much more able to respond to it in a productive way, so that in your life, at those moments in time when you're looking to make a change emotionally or behaviorally, that's when that information is going to make its way into consciousness and into the flow of your experience naturally, so that you suddenly find yourself responding in a way that's productive. And I guess that's the whole point. That's why people listen to hypnosis products. That's why people go to hypnotists. People go in order, and this is typically misunderstood by people. People go in order to be manipulated. Correct? Isn't that what people actually want? They want to be manipulated. They don't like the word manipulation, but it has a Latin root, manus, which means to lend a hand. So you're actually saying, please help me do this because I can't do this myself. And that's what we try to do. That's what you try to do. That's what other people who are in the business try to do.
You know, a funny thing about the manipulation, I vaguely remember Erickson telling a story. I think I'm probably butchering this, but I believe one of his students had said something about manipulation, and he's like, look, everybody manipulates everybody. He's like, your baby, if you have a baby, will cry to manipulate you to get food. If you're in sales, like I'm in sales, people will manipulate me to give them a lower price. You can't avoid manipulation.
Absolutely not. And so that if you can manipulate somebody and it's to their benefit, they will say, please do it again. and do more of it, because this is making my life more productive for me. So it's all about what you do. It's not about whether manipulation is good or bad. It's what the outcome is. And if it's obviously useful for somebody productive, then obviously manipulation is a good thing. So that's what we go for. Try to help somebody do something they don't typically have the ability to do on their own. Or they do, but they just don't know it. And that's what most of this is. It's getting people in touch with capabilities that they have. They just haven't used them or don't know that they have the capability. But so give them a little bit of a nudge, and the next thing, off you go. Assertiveness is one of those things where people tend to respond really well to this kind of technique, because there's all those energy to want to do that, to speak up for themselves, but there's something in the way, but you just kind of remove that, and boom, people will stand up for themselves and learn how to say no, or ask for something that they want, or do something that they know is really important for them to do.
For everybody listening to this, I would like to suggest that you check out some of Lloyd's products. If you're on a video on my video on YouTube or on my website, you can click the link in this post for two reasons. One, it's a good way to hear how somebody else does a dual induction product, so it might give you ideas. It's already given me tons of ideas. And another thing, if there's any positive changes you want to make, he's got CDs such as for procrastination, weight loss, prosperity, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's one product I had read about. I'm not really sure. I think it was really vague in the description. Maybe it comes from your Ericksonian background.
Mm-hmm.
It was the unconscious insulation, unconscious something or other.
You know, I don't. There was that earlier series of programs that I did, and that goes back early mid 1980s, and that's not that particular program, unless it's a title from one of the pieces of one of my programs, because a lot of these programs I did many years ago, and a lot of them had individual titles independent of the overall concept that the program had. So like there's a self-esteem program, but there's 4 different parts, or there's a changing emotions program, stress management program. Each one of them had a different title. This particular program, for some reason, I have amnesia for where it was in the history of the timeline of the concept. So, and it might have been part of the earlier series, and I'm not even quite sure that that's around anymore. Because I think you had questioned me about this quite a while ago. And
I think I might have, yeah.
Yeah, because I remember the question. I didn't remember exactly who it was, and I don't know, because it's not part of what's on the site as far as I know. There's about 14, 15, 16 programs on the site, but I don't think that's one of them.
I think I vaguely remember reading somewhere like it's a program you had done with somebody else, some guy named Eric or
Philip Halbeth.
Maybe.
Or you know what? Unless it was a program I did for somebody else, because I remember a couple of times people had commissioned me to write and record something for them, and it might have been something that they had the rights to, and I never sold, and they sold it as part of a program that they did, an overall program, in a personal development program, and that was something that they put in with them. So that probably may be what it is. That goes back a ways too, and I don't remember. I don't remember who the person was, but I remember I did that. So that might be what it is. But I don't have the rights to that program. They do, because I obviously sold it to them.
Yeah, it's easy. Especially over all the years, it's easy to forget what somebody does.
Oh my goodness! Yes, right. Yeah, but I think that might very well be what that was.
You're listening to the Hawaii Hypnosis Podcast. Can I ask you to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes by going to hawaiihypnosis.org/iTunes and give us a 5-star rating.
I've kind of played around with making dual inductions, but haven't come to anything as good as what you've produced.
All right. Well, I thank you very much for the compliment.
For the people listening, do you have any kind of tips that would help them to make a really good dual induction, or any kind of formula that you can share that's not too secret?
Well, I think that, number one, the single most important thing when you do a dual induction, as far as I'm concerned, is pace. Because slowing things down is so important because, as we talked about before, you're dealing with multiple input. So you want the process to be as easy to listen to as possible. So practicing speaking at a pace that's considerably slower than you would typically use, even slower than you would use if you were working with somebody live doing hypnotic trance, because people's pace varies doing trance work, and people have different styles. And so my own style tends towards slowing things way, way down. So if you're used to the normal speaking voice at let's say, metaphorically speaking, at 75 miles an hour, and most hypnosis is done, like, say, 45 or 50, slow it down to 35, because as slowing down can't hurt things, because people tend to then hop on board the slower pace, and they'll match their breathing, they'll pace their breathing to the slower pace. Then, if you're writing something, obviously you want whatever it is that you're writing about to parallel the state of whatever it is that you're trying to induce in people. So if it's a story, obviously you want the metaphor somehow to parallel the change that you want to make in people. If you want to do some subtle embedding of commands, then you have to figure out how to cross things over from one place to another. And so that means that you're going to have to write the material somewhat simultaneously, so that if you write, let's say, a page of material, half the page should be one track and the other half of the page the other track. And keep in mind that the best place to cross things over from one spot to the other is when there's a pause in the normal flow of speech. So that, for instance, if you're doing a single induction and you want to embed a command like speak up, the best place to do that would be speak being the last word in a sentence and up being the next word and it being the first word in that next sentence. So that, and then the man began to speak up. Until now, that was something that blah, 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 blah. So you pause right before you say speak, and then you hit the note of up right after speak very quickly, and then pause after up, and speak up obviously stands out. You mark it out. If you're doing it in dual induction, then it becomes a little bit easier, because up doesn't have to be in the same train of thought. Up can be up into the air went the balloon, if it's a story about whatever you happen to make the story up about. So the normal flow of speech has certain pauses in it. Use the pauses to mark out whatever it is that you're trying to do. In addition to the pauses, obviously you can change your vocal inflection to make it stand out a little bit more. Anything that you could do to obviously create that standing out effect will make it much more likely that it will take in terms of the perceptions by the person, hopefully unconsciously. And quite frankly, most people never notice those things. When I'm working with somebody live, I have yet in 30 years to ever have somebody say to me, I know where you marked out the messages. It never happened. If it's actually, when they're listening to the audio programs, because the whole point is to mark out the messages, people might notice some of them. But rarely does anybody ever notice any more than, say, 7 or 8 out of anywhere from 35 to 40 messages on a program. So you can see that if you can organize it in such a way that you mark these things out subtly, you're going to be much more effective, obviously, as a hypnotist or a hypnotechnologist if you're going to be recording material. But it takes practice, and if you're going to be recording a dual induction, then you really have to get used to being able to simultaneously listen to what you previously recorded while you're recording the second track. And obviously that's just experience and practice. And after a while, let me put it to you this way: if you listen to the first stuff I ever recorded, you'd never know you'd never know it was me doing the stuff that I did that you'd be listening to now, because it takes a while, obviously, to get it down, just like any set of skills. It took me a while not to be nervous in a recording studio, because there was just something about being in a recording studio for the first few times that was intimidating. Like, wow, I'm in a real recording studio, and it was a big deal. But just like everything else, you get it.
The anxiety in a recording studio doesn't seem real conducive to hypnosis.
No. The last thing anybody wants is a nervous hypnotist. That's not going to do it for anybody.
Join the ranks of the movers and shakers in the hypnosis and NLP community. Subscribe to the newsletter and discover why this podcast is taking the world by storm.
The one thing I really like about is the crossover. I remember the last one I think I was listening to was, there was a story about a girl, I think, in a balloon. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I forget which one it was, and I could hear the crossover, and then it dawned on me. I was like, oh wow, that's an embedded command. Yeah, folks, if you've never listened to this to his material, check it out. Really, really good. Probably some of the best hypnotic recordings I've heard.
I appreciate it. You want to hear something really interesting? When I first noticed myself accidentally doing the crossover, and then I started doing it systematically. As far as I knew, nobody had ever done this before. With the specific focus on that and doing it systematically. I'm sure people accidentally had done stuff, but nobody had ever used it as a formal way of going about doing it. Because most of what I do is based on trying to get those messages there. That's the core. Everything else is a subtle. Camouflage is not quite the right word, because the stories have a general framework of Joseph Campbell's myth of the hero, where somebody has a problem and he meets a transformative individual, a sorcerer or a wizard, and that person has magical powers. And the whole idea is to create you have problems, you encounter difficulties, you go out in the world, you have a transformative experience, and you come back into your life and you can cope with this more effectively. What was interesting is somebody once mentioned to me, and this goes back maybe 15 years, that what I discovered turns out to be something that some American Indian tribe had been doing for hundreds of years. That they actually had a technique where two shamans, Indian shamans, had the ability to actually do a dual induction and on the fly create crossover messages live, which blew me away. Like, oh my goodness, like, how would you ever be able to do that live? But so it's like you find out that everything that you think has never been done before actually has been done before by somebody under certain circumstances. You just didn't know about it. Nothing ever. Something happens, and it's happening in multiple places with multiple people, because that's just the way ideas happen. Nobody does it by themselves without, at some other point, somebody else figuring something out that's similar. Interesting, huh?
Yeah, I was at a training once in Long Beach, probably about half a year ago, and I think it was during like a break or whatever, and we decided, I was like, hey, look at this guy. I was like, hey, you know what a dual induction is? And he wasn't, I think he'd heard about it. He's like, he was kind of vague about it. I was like, here, check this out. So we hypnotized him, and we had a person on each side of him. We were kind of just, I mean, it wasn't the best dual induction, but you could tell like he was getting a smile on his face. And then at one point, instead of saying monetary, me and the other person just started to kind of walk around the person, so it gave him almost the disorienting effect.
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, the stuff. I don't know if you could tell, but I like the stuff. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah. By the way, when I first started doing it, I wasn't able to do it towards the latter stages of the HPP recordings, but the first bunch of programs, about the first 75% of them, used a holographic sound technology, a 360-degree dummy head, the kind of things that they use when they record sound in automobiles. And so when you're listening to many of my programs, you'll have a sense of me moving. And I literally was moving. That wasn't just the panning of a soundboard in a recording studio. That was me physically moving around the head to give that sensation of movement, which also adds to a little bit of a more dramatic effect to the listener. And I think it makes it more powerful because it creates the sensation of real presence. And obviously that just makes it that much more powerful because there's a sense of, wow, it feels like the guy's actually here moving around. But go one other point about the dual induction, and whether this story is apocryphal or not, I'm not sure. But I believe that Bandler and Grinder were the first people to actually do this, and they got it, I believe, and then, again, I'm not unsure whether it's true, from one of the early Carlos Castaneda books where there's that scene in, I think, Volume 3 where Carlos is sitting at the edge of an abyss, and Don Juan and his sorcerer friend Don Gennaro are each sitting on the side of him and start doing what turns out to be a dual induction. I think that's where the whole thing started, which is really ironic that what we now know to be fiction turned out to be the point of reference or ground zero for what turned out to be one of the more interesting hypnotic technologies. Were you aware of that issue, that item of dual induction history in the Carlos Castaneda books from the late 60s, early 70s?
I vaguely remember that. I don't remember. I'm almost drawing at straws. I can't remember if I read Bandler or Grinder
making reference to that, because I know one of them did, and I'm pretty sure that, because I don't remember the dual induction being part of anything prior to them. Now maybe somebody else who nobody knows about introduced them. They came across it because, like I said, so many of these things happen and you don't know where. They happen in multiple places with multiple people. But the most visible place was in that book, and from that moment on, from their reference of it, all of a sudden you had people doing it, and it's an interesting use of voice.
Yeah, I vaguely remember hearing that. And the first recorded dual induction I've seen, or the oldest recorded dual induction that I know of was one with Bandler and Grinder. It was a video, super grainy. This guy was probably had to be late 70s because they were still around. They're still working together. They were telling some lady a story about a parrot or something. Old stuff.
Yeah, there's nothing like an interesting metaphor when somebody's in a deep trance to have a profound. The first time I ever used a metaphor, I actually read it out of one of their books. When somebody had their eyes closed and were in a trance state, I remember that there was something that was very, very useful for a woman who couldn't get out of a relationship. She was having an affair with somebody, and she kept on going back and back and back and back and back. And then in one of their books, there was a story about a guy who worked in a factory, and he accidentally wasn't paying attention, and he actually cut his finger off in a lathe. And when he was explaining it to somebody else, he did, whoops, there goes another one. And it was just, you keep doing the same thing, you're going to get the same outcome. And I read it verbatim right out of the book. First time I ever used the technique. And she came back the following week, and she had no idea what I had done. Came back and told me she ended the relationship. Weird, huh?
She's like, no, don't want any more cut fingers.
Yeah, exactly. Not such a great idea, right? But very effective use of, Erickson was a genius, as we all know.
Oh yeah, I don't know if you heard my my April Fool's joke this past year.
No.
You know who Zig is? Zig.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I interviewed one of my friends from the UK. I was like, let's do an April Fool's joke. You're gonna talk like Erickson. We're gonna release it as a rare Erickson audio. A lot of people thought it was funny. A lot of people laughed because Erickson was a prankster. He was a jokester.
Uh-huh.
I got an email from Jeff Zieg the day of. I think it was, God, the community is so tight-knit. I got an email from him saying, that's not a video of Dr. Erickson. He sounded kind of mad. I'm like, it's April Fool's. I'm having fun.
Oh, he got upset about that?
I think he did, and I was trying to get an interview with him, so I think I might have to wait. I might have to wait a little while on that one.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, Lloyd, I just want to say thank you very much for allowing me to interview you. This has been awesome. Well,
I very much appreciate it, and perhaps we'll do it again.
And perhaps you might have to make it out here to sunny Hawaii.
I will. I'm sure I'll get out there sometime. But I will certainly let you know. I look forward to meeting you in person.
Oh, cool, definitely. And everybody listening to this, check out his material. You will be blown away.
Thank you again.
Yep. Aloha.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Hawaii Hypnosis Podcast. Connect with us at facebook.com/Hawaii Hypnosis, twitter.com/Hawaii Hypnosis, and youtube.com/Hawaii Hypnosis.